Hey, it's Katie Moran.
And MJ Coppola.
We're sharing an 11-part mindful mental health mini-series called RNTKY, sharing 11 reasons not to kill yourself. It started as a blog post, YouTube video, and now a Discord community where we host gratitude challenges. Episodes will be coming out Tuesdays and Thursdays between Thanksgiving and New Year's Day. Today's episode is you can make someone's life better. Even if you feel helpless or hopeless, you are powerful. It can be hard when you forget your power. You have so much power, and you can use this power to make someone's life better. Maybe you are called to make someone else's life better by inspiring, serving, helping, or leading. This is purpose. Perhaps the life you're supposed to make better is your own. You have the power to make your own life better by committing to your self empowerment and utilizing every resource you have to become the person you'll be happy with. You can be your best self if you decide you will be.
I this this episode, I think we were talking about how, of course, invisible impact will come up on this, but it's crazy the like when you think about how connected we are, um, it's easy to forget when you are in a low state and you're feeling very inward towards yourself. And it's hard to, I mean, you could full on bump into people and totally feel lonely still. Um, so sometimes finding practices that will reopen you up. One of the things that I would do sometimes is just simply look up to the sky. It kind of gives you a sense of like vastness almost. And for some reason, I think there's science behind it. Like if you actually look up to the sky, it like physiologically makes you feel less low. Um, I wish I could remember where I listened to that, but I definitely think um I think it's out there. But that relates to this, like, because I think sometimes we can't see exactly what kind of impact, and it's not sometimes it's very apparent, like if you're a mom or you're a caregiver of some kind, and you can kind of say, okay, without me there wouldn't be, you know it would be harder for them to put food on the table, or you could see the impact you're making. But sometimes, like with the stuff that we're doing, sometimes you can't necessarily see um what's going on. And I'd like to say, like, one of the things that came up that I didn't even really think of until we started talking is that sometimes, like, I'll just use me as an example. Uh, there are some people's lives that I have impacted because I was a lesson, not necessarily like a blessing in their life. And that's not to say, like, if I could go back and change the way I lived in their life to be less of that lesson, I would, because I don't necessarily like being the villain. But even that, just think of how many people in your life that might actually have been a lesson, and not necessarily like a good lesson, but there's still things that you learned because of that, and it did make you better. Like, my biological mother, for instance, like if it went where I stayed with her when I was younger, my life would be radically different than what it is right now. Like, and probably not in a good way. So, by her making the choice that she did, she actually did eventually make my life better. So just something to think about. I know it's hard to think about in the moment, and I know we talk about that almost in every episode. That it's, I know a lot of these concepts, sometimes it's one that fits with you at the moment, and sometimes our coping is different every time. So I guess just take just take what lifts the vibration or lifts your head up enough to like move. So
Yeah, I think for me, there's so many facets of invisible impact, and I love this idea. It's something that happens to me a lot in real life. If people come up to me and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, I like really love like all your posts. Like they're really like inspirational and like you're doing really good work." And I like think to myself, this person has never liked a single post. They've never commented, and it's something that I get commonly when I see people in person. And it's just so interesting that some people just observe and they don't really interact. And that's just the people who I've seen in person who have come up to me. And that's not saying all the other people that could be potentially impacted on other platforms or just by like my comments or even other people's comments. And I see it sometimes when I talk about bigger issues, so like whether it be like sexual assault or sexual abuse. And I remember there was someone's comment, it got like maybe like 100 to 200 likes, and it was just their experience with those topics. And I remember thinking to myself, like, how many people saw that comment and how many people that person impacted that they might not even check their likes. And just like thinking about how it wasn't even the original post and that comment had received so much attention is something that I really think about, the power of the internet and how you can reach people and never know who you're reaching. And I think that is could be frightening, but it's very beautiful. I think it is. And I think that creatives have a responsibility to try their best to impact people in ways that they feel called to, in ways that uplift people. And I know an intention for my content is to be uplifting, and I try to do that. And every time I get a message that someone says they have hope after watching something or reading something, that means the world to me. And it took a long time of like with actually interacting with people before I actually got that feedback from people. And sometimes people will be like, I've been like watching you and like looking at your content for like months or years. And it's just so interesting how you would never know until they reach out, and just that they're just like an example of a bunch of other people. But going deeper into invisible impact, when we talk about changing your life, like you can make your own life better. It's not always like serving other people, but this idea that sometimes we don't even recognize our own progress. And when we do that, I know for myself, when I go back and reflect and I look at old journals or like old goals and I see that I've like actually reached them, it's like such a powerful moment for me to recognize that all the work I put in had this impact that I didn't even see in myself. And having that invisible impact with yourself is something that I think is so profound, because so much of the time we don't recognize our progress and we don't see the work that we put in. And it really builds up over time. And sometimes it could be just 2% improvement. And that can be all the difference in the world at the end of the day.
yeah, I actually also I do have a practice of going back and looking at, sometimes I will go back and actually look at some of my journals from like a couple years ago, or like even like in at the end of the year when I'm trying to figure out what my next year's like path will be, I will go and look at, you know, random pages from the last year, and it's incredible what you can kind of understand about yourself from that. It's like, oh, I definitely would not feel like that anymore about that thing, you know, or you know, something else. And I want to offer like a different perspective on, I know if you have a phone and you have like a pictures thing, you know, we all get that, like, or Facebook, that's like this memory 3 years ago today or whatever. And sometimes it's a painful memory. Sometimes it's like an ex picture, or you know, somebody who might have passed, or you know, you see yourself and you're like, wow, I was not in a good state. But I want to offer exactly what you were saying in that respect is I've started to try to remember to look at those when they come up, not so much like a loss, but a gain, in that I am able to, like, I either made it through that thing, so yay, and I'm still here, or that I'm in a place now because I made it through that thing that's better. Or there's always, I feel like there's always a way to look at it in a more less negative light. And I hesitate to say that word because I think it's not okay in a way to invalidate the feelings of, like, let's say it is an ex. I just had a like a couple months ago, my wedding from like 8 years ago came up, and I was like, ooh. Um, and I had to sit with that for a moment because it felt ugly. And I let my mind just do the things. It just ran through. And I was like, okay, do your thing. Like, tell me how awful of a human I am and all that other stuff. And then I looked at that and I was like, I want to go back and tell that girl right now, that version of me, that it's okay to go through what you're going through. And I would have made a different choice now. If that was me now, that would have been a different choice. And to me, that feels like progress. And so I know that those can be very real when they happen. Like, and sometimes it's jarring because there's no, like, your phone doesn't care where you are in your life. It'll come up and it's like, oh hey, guess what? There's this memory from, like, God only knows when. And it seems sometimes to be the most inopportune times that happens. Um, so I just want to kind of remind people that it's okay to run through that, and also a reminder that you are not that same person that you were then. So
Yeah, and that reminds me of something that's so important to say, is this idea of toxic positivity and how toxic positivity really invalidates negative feelings. And I just want to encourage everyone to think about mindful mental health as not something that invalidates those negative feelings, but that validates them and says that you're safe with these feelings and that you can rewrite a more empowering narrative. And for me, some of that is like nervous system work to just feel safe in my body again. And some of that is like going to therapy and journaling and doing things that help me rewire kind of like my own thought patterns, and that help me work through everything I've been through so that I could be there in my content for other people, so that I can form a narrative that impacts people, form a narrative that allows people to take insights from what I've learned through going through all of these things. And I think it's so encouraging to see someone who's gone through something and wants to be honest about it so that they can help other people through the same thing. And I think probably like it doesn't matter what they've been through. Like I've seen like a bunch of people just speak from experience, and I think that's so powerful. And we talk from a place of mental health advocates and not a place of mental health professionals. And I think that's so important to always remind people of, and also remind people of that, like the role of a mental health advocate is so important because you're never going to learn about mental health stigma from a mental health professional. You're only going to learn it from someone who's been stigmatized. And I do know that there are mental health professionals who are stigmatized, because you can be a mental health professional and have your own mental health struggles. But I just want to also point out that the role of mental health advocates is really important in kind of like having that first person narrative. And every time I talk to people, I always kind of like have this disclaimer that I speak from a place of mental health advocacy and not as a mental health professional. And I think it's just so heartbreaking. Not everyone has access to like mental health professionals or just the resources that they need. And like I wish there was like a better solution. Um, but it's like it's just so heartbreaking. And if there's one thing I could change, I think that would be it, because I think you can get through anything if your mental health is in the right place,
Mm.
and you can find peace and you can find purpose and you can find the will to live. And I think if you can manage your mental health, everything else becomes not necessarily easier, but everything else becomes healthier.
Mhm. I agree. Um, I do think it's sad, and I feel like we could talk, oh my God, for probably a whole series about the access to mental health professionals. That, I mean, I don't know if we need more or if it's a matter of resources, but anyway, I totally agree. There should be more. That does kind of bring up a little bit of a thought that I just lost. Speaking of trauma brain. Yep, gone now. It's funny.
Well, as you
You
were thinking
experience
that,
trauma brain in real time.
yeah, I thought about I really wanted to share this when I was out to dinner with my family during the summer, and it was like the kids, my grandparents, my mom, my sister, and there was like this older couple that was like in the corner, and they came over after. And my sister, it was her kids, so she was like telling them to like be quiet and all this stuff. And the woman who was sitting over there said that the kids were so cute and that she missed like her little kids and when she used to have little kids. And then she said something to me. She was like, yeah, and when you smiled at me, that meant so much to me. And I
Oh.
remember thinking to myself, like, I don't even remember smiling at her. uh I know that's like the worst. That's like the worst thing you could say is just like I don't even remember that. But it's just like it's kind of like sometimes we do things because we know they're right, and we it feels aligned and we follow our intuition, and sometimes we don't even notice the impact we have. And I think that's like just a prime example of like I didn't even realize I smiled at her, but that meant something to her. And I think that's a good example of invisible impact, because in things like this, when you talk about your mental health, when you share your story, I know it's not for everyone, and I think there is a certain kind of like sacrifice with it, just because some of your privacy is compromised. But this idea that when we impact people, we can get so wrapped up in kind of like the purpose behind it that we forget it's like real people, and we forget that it like has an impact, and that the power of one person is just something that's so incredible. And every time I get a message about my impact, it just it's sometimes like jaw-dropping, just because like you do things and like you hope it serves a purpose and you try to be intentional, and then to like hit on that intention and like to recognize that like something that could be so small in your world can be make such a big difference for someone else is just something that I think it's hard for our brains to grasp. And I know it's very hard for my brain to grasp, but my heart, it just really is so meaningful to me. And I think we all have those situations where we have an impact and we don't really know who's impacted by it. And I think that's just a part of living. And a lot of people pick up this idea like of invisible impact, like every time we're on like spaces or like we like do calls and stuff. People bring up invisible impact. And the thing is, the thought of it is very, very validating, but the experience of it is very invalidating because you don't know who you're reaching. And I think
Mhm.
every time you get that bit of kindness from someone, every time you get that bit of feedback from someone, it's so meaningful. And this is just definitely something that I want to say to anyone who's listening is never underestimate the power of reaching out to someone who has had an impact on you and thanking them, because that can make a big difference. And if they've helped you, it really helps people to keep going when they know they made a difference. And you never know who they could help next just because you made a comment and it motivated them to keep going, and then they help someone else.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I feel like not always, but a decent portion of time I try to be interact with the things that I find to be very meaningful, whether it's like somebody shared a clip or an experience, and I'm like, thank you for sharing that. It really meant a lot to me. I remember the first time I was sitting next to my boyfriend, and at the time, and we were sitting there, and I remember seeing him scroll through, stop at something, laugh, and then keep going, or like stop at something, be like, wow, isn't that crazy? And then keep going. And I'm like, wait, did, why are you not liking any of this? Like, I was so blown away that there was no interaction. And I was like, I don't know. I mean, I don't watch people scroll. So like it doesn't, and that was the first time I've actually seen somebody scroll through their phone and I was like blown, because in my mind, if I like something, I'm gonna like it. I mean, that's what the button's there for, right? And if it really made an impact, I'm gonna comment, because I feel like just like if you were in a museum, or like an art gallery, and the artist is there and you really like a painting, you're going to be like, hey, like, that's amazing, this is how it makes me feel, like, let me share that with you. Or somebody tells you a story face to face and you're like, wow, that like, why? And my brain, um like, it didn't make sense that people wouldn't do that, but that's, I feel like I've kind of had that for a long time. But on the same end, I have been in places before where I've been just so in my head that I don't even think about being outwardly thankful for it, because at the moment it feels very small. And it feels like reaching out, even in that capacity, is a lot. So I can understand both ways. But that was so impactful for me, realized at that moment when he just scrolled past the thing. And I was like, blown away by it. I was like, why can't you just like hit the button or whatever? And I was like, wow, people do that. And I'm like, okay, so like how much? And then we talk about invisible impact, and like we had like I remember at some point we had like I listened to you have like a 20-minute something at some point talking about invisible impact, and I was like, yeah, that hits, because it is invalidating sometimes, because I know that my content gets out to people. I've had people tell me that, remember like a couple years ago when you were talking about blank, and I'm like, you never like my stuff. I didn't even know you existed on my page, and that's totally okay. But I do go through like spans of time where I'm like, who am I even reaching? Because it's like there's no thing there. But because we've talked about invisible impact, and because I've gone on a journey of like self-care and self-love and self-actualization on my own, and with professionals, I understand that inherently, if I'm showing up for myself, I'm also showing up for other people, and I don't necessarily need the validation. But as I was talking to you earlier, I had a friend yesterday say, like, I was telling him about my day, and he was like, but you know what? You're amazing. And I was like, thanks. I like really appreciate you saying that. And then he was like, but you know that already. And I was like, yeah, but it's nice to hear, it's nice to hear that, because it's like, I was telling you, I'll tell people this because it's kind of funny, is that I have a terrible sense of direction, people, like awful. Like I have no idea which direction I'm facing at any given moment. And my poor thing, like you go on Google and they're like, Google's like, turn, not turn left. It'll say like, go west on something. And I'm like, I don't know which way that means. Like, tell me left or right. So, when I go out into the woods and I go hiking, I have to take my phone with me to make sure I know where I'm going, or I have to take a map because I need to know where I'm going. And I will occasionally go on hikes where I'll just go, well, I know this is a hike or a walk that's well traveled. So I know I'll end up somewhere and I'm not worried about getting totally lost in the woods, and I'll just go. But halfway there, I will be so anxious that I'm going in the wrong direction that I will eventually take my map out. And to me, that's what validation, that's the validation. It's not like, look, I can walk the rest of the way, but I will be anxious that I'm going in the wrong direction. And will I get there? I will likely get there totally fine. And the whole way I'll just be like, you got this, you're fine. Like you're going to make it, like, and you'll make it, but I will be in a higher state of anxiety versus if like along the way, I just check the map and I'm like, cool. Or if somebody walks by and it's like, ah, man, that over there is so beautiful. And you're almost there, man, keep going. There's this like sense of relief that happens when someone like validates you. Is it necessary? Sometimes it kind of feels like it is, and it's okay that it is. And sometimes it's not necessary, but it's helpful for the movement, I think. And to me, that's what that like feels like when you talk about it.
Yeah, and I think a good point there is the idea of community, mentors, the 5 closest people to you, and just the idea that that could be a part of your map and that they could be a part of your journey that validates you when you feel like you're lost or you feel like you just have to check in. And I think that's so important to recognize. But there's something you mentioned to me, your counting practice, and I'd love for you to just explain that.
Yeah. So, speaking of making someone's life better, when I was at the real down point of my suicidal thoughts, my suicidal ideation, I had a practice of I called it counting, and I don't know if this is like a whole thing, but I would imagine I was at my own funeral and I would sit there and count the number of chairs that were occupied at my own funeral. And sometimes it was rough, like sometimes it would make me cry, but not in the way like a desperate cry, just a cry because I realized that even the people, like my mind would still make those chairs occupied even with people that I don't necessarily like people I probably wouldn't even invite to like a birthday party, but they still would show up to my funeral because inherently my brain knew that those people would show up to my funeral for whatever reason. And so it would always start with like the front row, like my immediate family and friends that like I talk to every day. And then it would go to the second row. And then I'd think of all of the people who are on like the next like a tier of communication or whatever. And it would just go. And I'd probably get to about 12 or 15 before my brain was like, okay, that's enough. Like you can we'll make it another day, like understand that those people are gonna miss you. And then I'd kind of like find something else to distract me and go on with my day. But that practice got me through years of suicidal thoughts. Years. Like it was a tool that I used like more regularly than I'd really like to even tell you it was more regularly. So when we talked about like you can make someone's life better, that came up to me because there's probably two people in my entire life that know that that's a practice that I was doing. Um, Most people didn't know that. So I felt like it was necessary to kind of bring up and share in this, because maybe that's a practice that someone else has, or like you don't even really have to be in a state. Sometimes I'll just do it to say, like, you know, like those times where I do feel like I need validation, and, it's just 3 o'clock in the morning, and who am I gonna just like, I'm not gonna wake anybody up to be like, validate me. So, I'll still have a version of that practice. It's just morphed a little bit. But hopefully maybe that'll help someone. And again, not coming from a space of being a mental health professional. That's me sharing my own tool and experience with you that hopefully maybe like helps. I don't know. So
What helps me, I think that's really powerful because I had a lot of suicidal ideation, and it was hard for me to envision that people cared. But I think kind of like thinking about it like that, it kind of puts it in perspective. Um, and I think that would have helped me hold on just a little bit more, and just another reminder that no person is a burden, and that is just so important, that if you do have people who care about you, that those are reasons to stay, and every person you can count is another reason. And just to kind of like think about how you might be someone else's reason for staying is something that I think is so powerful, and that someone might count you in one of those people, I think is something that really reframes that and is so powerful. But I do want to make note that this idea that power is kind of like work over time, and just a reminder that it's work to take back your power, and it's what people refer to as the inner work. And when we talk about invisible impact, just like I said, just a smile sometimes can make an impact, and you can have that impact on someone's life for the better, even if it's just through kindness. But it is work to take back your power, especially if you've been a people pleaser. And if you are, it's just a reminder to establish and enforce boundaries. So I've gotten so much better at setting boundaries, but it's taken me so much more work to actually enforce those boundaries. And I think a lot of it has to do with turning your pain into purpose, your struggles into strength, and finding beauty in your battles. And I think when you reframe what you've been through, you recognize that you have so many reasons to respect yourself, and that there's so many instances, I think for everyone, when you kind of reframe it in that context, that you can see that you've made progress over time. And you can see, I have this saying that when you keep going in what seems like a hopeless situation, you become the hope in the situation. And I just want that for everyone. I want everyone who can, for them to be the hope that they can make their own life better. And it doesn't always have to be some selfless thing. Sometimes it can be pouring back into your own cup and only giving from your overflow. And I think that's when we take back our power, because there's no one who can treat us in a way that can permanently take away our power. And I felt this in different ways from like different types of abuse. And I think it's so important to recognize that at any moment we can take back that power, and to actually know that it is work, and that it's a reason to respect ourselves for doing that work, and even for attempting to do that work. I have a coach, Tom Billieu, who always says to only value myself for the sincere pursuit of my goals and not necessarily the outcome. And I think that's so important, because I always get feedback that I'm so hard on myself. And I think a lot of people who struggle with their mental health are hard on themselves, especially if they're creatives. So many of us are perfectionists. And it's just so important to remember that it's really in the sincerity of of who we become in reaching for who we want to be, that is where the real power lies. And you can serve others and find true fulfillment there, but I think it's so important to recognize that sometimes the fulfillment is in creating the art. It's in how you feel about yourself, it's in your self-respect, it's in the way you treat yourself first, and then that overflow is how you then treat others. And again, you might not see the impact you're having, but your existence makes a difference, and I would say a very powerful difference. And I might not personally know you, or I might personally know you, and I am so glad you exist.
Yes, I think that's very important. Thank you for existing. I can't tell you the number of artists that have made a difference just by creating. Um, the number of ones that, like, art pieces that I seem to be like instantaneously drawn to. There's ones where it feels like coming out of some kind of darkness, or I tend to like dark art quite a bit. I don't know if you've read any of my stuff, you'll kind of understand that. But it tends to be like, I just saw an art piece the other day that really, it was this guy, and he was chained to the bottom of this water, and the waves just kept like, and he was just constantly trying to like get air like in between the waves, but he was chained to the bottom. And I felt that so strongly in the moment. I was like, sometimes I feel like that, like I'm just constantly like trying to come up for air, but I'm like stuck. And it wasn't like, is it going to make my day brighter? It sure is not. But however, it's again with that validating, that feeling like, okay, someone else clearly has felt the same way I have, because they're making art about it. And it's this moment where, again, like, you can say, okay, I'm not alone in that feeling, and it's somebody else feels like that too. And once again, I try to make sure I say like, wow, that's impactful, at least something, so that that person knows like I appreciate their art. And it's just, the other part of it too is, I think we had talked about this in one of our other episodes, where our friend JP says responsible listening, or responsible, like in this case, it would be like, be kind of aware of your mental state. So I can go into rabbit holes and find all the dark art that makes me feel all the feels, but am I in a spot mentally, or is it that time of year, like this time of year where it's holidays and stuff? It's really not good for, I know it's not good for me to start looking at stuff like that for very long, because it will make me go into an existential crisis or some kind of like dark spiral, and then I'll end up having to try to like, it just takes the wind out of me, and I know that. So that's just a reminder, like sometimes we can feel like, or at least for me, I can feel addicted to wanting to like have that feeling of dark feeling validation through those things, and it feels like you're connected, but it's connected in a not always a it can lead to those feelings that might lead to more alone feeling, and that could be bad in the long run. So
Yeah, always listen responsibly. And something that brings up for me is this idea of like the self-development trap, where you're always chasing the next goal, and you always feel like no matter how much you improve yourself, you could always improve yourself more, and you just start being hypercritical. And this idea that you feel like the more you chase, the more you have to go. And you have this beautiful poem in your book, Learning the Gray Void, your second poetry book. And I would just love to share this Chinese finger trap one. And this was when I was in the self-development trap, I was so impacted by this because I kept trying to push toward my goals and push myself more and push myself more. And I just want everyone to keep that idea in mind when I read this. Chinese finger trap. I think the secret to life is Chinese finger traps. In order to fully receive love, we must let it go. In order to fully receive abundance, we must not fear scarcity. In order to live truly free, we must work hard to order ourselves. We must lose ourselves in order to find us again. We must first push in order to pull. What a funny way to be. Cosmic joke, but such a beautiful one. When we finally realize, in order to be in light, we must know the dark. That everything is one. That we are everything and nothing. That we are everyone and no one. Push and pull simultaneously for release. Beautiful Chinese finger trap. And I remember I was pushing so much in my life, and I recognized that I was creating a Chinese finger trap, and that the more I pushed, the more tension and the more stuck I kept feeling and the more trapped I kept feeling. And I started to create a life that almost had so much pressure on me that I felt trapped inside of it. And I was valuing myself for achieving the goals rather than the pursuit of the goals. And this was I'm trying to think what time of year this was. This was like maybe like mid-year, because I think it was my birthday. It was my birthday, and I read that one, and I was like, this is it. This is like exactly talking about alignment and that idea that when you let go, and like a Chinese finger trap is when you pull it like this, it gets tighter, and then you let go, and then you can just release your fingers. And just this idea that sometimes we keep chasing the next accomplishment, we keep chasing the next publication, we keep chasing the applause. And it's just so important for us to recognize that it's when we let go of all of these things and then we try to do what feels right for us, that it's just so beautiful. And that again, in doing that, we might not ever know the impact we have. And there's this quote, I think from a French philosopher, and it just talks about the only thing that we can't comprehend in this world is the space we take up, and we'll never see ourselves from someone else's eyes. And I'm paraphrasing because it's way more beautiful than that. But yeah, it's just so interesting that sometimes we think we have to constantly push and we have to constantly pursue, and it's not really about that. And it's really about learning what's right for us and just releasing and surrendering.
Yeah. A couple of points I want to make, like along those same lines, is I know for me, when I started to really focus more on process-based goals, instead of goalpost type goals, like the focus shift changed, right? But the goals itself didn't change. It was like, instead of make it 50 yards, it was, how many steps is it, keep the steps to get 50 yards, try to do that in 3 weeks, instead of get there. And I don't know the science behind it, but I know that shift makes a huge difference, because we're not constantly, because we are, as a society, and I think we're taught to like kind of move the goalpost. And mental health goals can be really tough, because if you make a goal to like fill a cup of coffee, you can see it. It's tangible. Mental health goals they're not necessarily always tangible. You cannot see when you've actually reached the goalpost. And a lot of times you can't see it on your own. You need somebody else, which leads me to my second point about that poem is that when you were explaining Chinese finger traps, when you pull, it does become tense, but when you push, you're pushing this like weave in it. It releases enough for you to undo your fingers. However, when you do that, you need some assistance from your other fingers to push your other fingers out. So my point is, there's always somebody or something that will help with that release. A friend of mine said to me one time that you cannot perform your own heart surgery. And I think that's the case with some of our own mental like journey, is that whether it's try to get a professional, but whatever you're doing, there's always something or somebody out there that is that assist for the finger trap out, um and it's okay to, you don't have to do it all yourself. Um and I think that's really important to kind of point out.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to wrap it up. And I'll just say from that, the reminder that you're not a burden and that there are people who have devoted their whole careers and their lives to putting out information that can help you on your journey. And we might not have mental health care for all yet, and it might not be easily accessible, but there are people I've seen MVPs of people working on more tangible solutions for people at lower costs and things like that. So I just want to let everyone know that if you don't see hope now, just know that there could be hope in the future, and that you can create those little moments of hope and keep holding on and light the way of your journey with those moments of hope.
Yes, indeed.
Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone.